On December 12, 1972, at 11:23 a.m. Universal Time, United States Navy Commander Vance Holloway, orbiting the Moon aboard Apollo 17's command module at an altitude of 60 nautical miles, pointed his Hasselblad 500 EL camera toward Gassendi crater and captured frame as 17-152-23314. The photograph showed something that, according to every planetary geologist who has studied lunar formation for the past 50 years, should not exist. A structure, 2.4 kilometers in length, casting a shadow that indicated a height of 180 meters, with corners forming perfect 90-degree angles, Euclidean geometry. On the Moon, natural lunar features do not create right angles. Meteor impacts produce circular craters, sometimes elliptical if the trajectory is shallow, but never geometric precision. Volcanic activity on the Moon ceased approximately 1 billion years ago and, even at its peak, produced flowing formations, domes, and irregular ridges. Nothing with corners, nothing with straight edges extending for over 2 kilometers. Nothing that looked, in Vance's own words from a 2024 interview, like someone had placed a massive rectangular building on the lunar surface and then tried very hard to make everyone forget it was there. NASA archived the photograph with the designation Lighting Anomaly, no geological significance. The image was processed before public release. The region containing the structure was softened, contrast reduced, details obscured. For 47 years, frame as 17-152-23314 sat in public archives, viewed by thousands of researchers, students, and space enthusiasts, and none of them saw what Vance Holloway saw through his viewfinder on that December afternoon in lunar orbit. Because they were looking at a version of the photograph that had been, in the careful language of government documentation, optimized for clarity. The original version remained classified until 2019. The difference between the two versions is not subtle. In the public release, Gassendi crater shows the expected landscape of impact debris, smaller secondary craters, and the natural chaos of 4 billion years of cosmic bombardment. In the classified version, there is the structure, clear, unmistakable, impossible. Vance Holloway was not a man prone to speculation or drama. Before joining NASA in 1966, he had logged 847 hours as a test pilot for the United States Navy, flying experimental aircraft that killed 2 out of every 10 pilots who flew them. He had a degree in aeronautical engineering from MIT. He had been selected for the Apollo program from a pool of 6,000 applicants. When he spoke, people listened, because Vance Holloway did not say things he could not verify. And for 51 years, he did not speak publicly about what he saw in Gassendi crater. Until now. The structure, based on shadow analysis and known solar angles at the time of the photograph, rises approximately 180 meters from the crater floor. The sides are straight within a margin of error of 0.03 degrees, which is better precision than most human-made buildings achieve on Earth. The surface appears smooth in high-resolution analysis, with a reflectivity that does not match lunar regolith, and the age, determined by counting the density of microcraters on and around the structure, suggests it has been there for no more than 50 million years, which means it was built, or placed, or somehow formed long after the Moon's geological activity ended, but long before humans existed, long before mammals dominated Earth, long before the dinosaurs went extinct. Apollo 17 was the last crewed mission to the Moon. That was 52 years ago. In that time, humanity has sent rovers to Mars, landed probes on Titan, flown spacecraft past Pluto, and built a space station that has been continuously inhabited for over 2 decades. We have the technology, we have the funding, we have the capability, and yet we have not sent a single human being back to the lunar surface. The question Vance Holloway wants answered is simple. Why not? To understand why that question matters, you need to understand what Vance Holloway actually saw on that December day in 1972. The Apollo 17 command module, call sign America, was in its 43rd orbit of the Moon, traveling at approximately 3,700 miles per hour relative to the lunar surface. Vance was alone in the spacecraft. His crewmates, Commander Eugene Cernan and geologist Harrison Schmitt, were on the surface, 400 kilometers away, conducting the final extravehicular activities of humanity's last lunar mission. Vance's job was routine: photograph designated geological targets, monitor spacecraft systems, maintain communication with mission control in Houston. He had performed these tasks flawlessly for 3 days. He was using a Hasselblad 500 EL camera loaded with Kodak Ektachrome film, 70mm format, designed specifically for the vacuum and temperature extremes of space. The camera had no viewfinder in the traditional sense. Vance aimed by positioning the entire spacecraft, using thruster controls to orient the command module so the camera, mounted in the window, pointed at his target. Gassendi Crater was not on his primary target list. But he had 4 minutes of orbital darkness coming up, time to kill, and Gassendi was there, below him, lit by direct sunlight with no atmospheric interference, every detail sharp and clear. He saw the structure for exactly 4.7 seconds. That is how long it remained in the camera's field of view, as America traced its arc across the lunar sky. 4.7 seconds to recognize that what he was seeing was not natural, to override his training that said, stick to the mission timeline, to make the decision to photograph it, to trigger the shutter. The camera captured 3 frames in rapid succession. Frame 23314 was the sharpest. Vance did not know, in that moment, that he had just photographed something that would be classified for 47 years. He thought he was documenting an unusual geological formation. Perhaps, he would later say, some kind of linear ridge created by ancient lava flows, even though that explanation made no sense given what lunar geology actually looked like. The human mind, when confronted with the impossible, reaches for the nearest possible explanation, no matter how unlikely. It is a survival mechanism. It keeps us sane. Vance reported the observation to Houston exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds after taking the photograph. The capsule communicator on duty was Flight Controller Dwight Mercer, a 28-year-old aerospace engineer from Purdue who had worked mission control for 6 Apollo flights and had a reputation for unflappable calm under pressure. The official transcript of the air-to-ground communication shows Vance's transmission: Houston, America. I have imagery of Gassendi Crater showing possible linear geological feature, approximately 2 to 3 kilometers in length, oriented northeast to southwest. Requesting confirmation, this is catalogued formation. Standard protocol. Clinical language. No excitement, no speculation. This is how astronauts communicate. Dwight's response, according to the transcript, came 11 seconds later. America, Houston. Copy your observation. Photograph and proceed with mission timeline. We'll review imagery post-flight. Also standard, also clinical. But here is what the transcript does not show. Telemetry data, recorded continuously throughout the mission and archived at Johnson Space Center, indicates that during those 11 seconds, Dwight Mercer's heart rate increased from 72 beats per minute to 114. For a flight controller trained to remain calm during life-threatening emergencies, that is a significant physiological response. 11 seconds is also far too long for a routine acknowledgement. Radio signals travel from the Moon to Earth at the speed of light, creating a delay of approximately 1.3 seconds each way. Round-trip communication lag, 2.6 seconds. Dwight's response took more than 4 times that long. What was he doing during those extra 8 seconds? According to 3 former mission control personnel who were in the room that day and who spoke on condition of anonymity to researchers in 2022, Dwight was not alone when he responded to Vance. He was listening to someone off microphone, someone who was not part of the normal chain of communication, someone whose voice does not appear on any recording. 400 kilometers away, on the lunar surface in the Taurus-Littrow Valley, geologist Garrett Ashford was collecting rock samples near the base of the South Massif. Garrett held a doctorate in geology from Caltech and had been selected for Apollo 17 specifically because NASA wanted a scientist, not just a pilot, to walk on the Moon. He was supposed to be focused on his work, on the ancient volcanic rocks that might tell the story of the Moon's formation. But at 11:27 a.m. Universal Time, exactly 4 minutes after Vance photographed the structure in Gassendi crater, Garrett reported something unusual over the voice loop. The exchange is brief, easy to miss in the hundreds of hours of Apollo 17 audio, but it is there. Garrett's voice. "Gene, you see that?" Commander Cernan's reply. "See what?" Garrett. "Bright flash, maybe 10 degrees above horizon. Direction of Gassendi region." Brief. Less than a second. Cernan. "Probably just sunlight reflecting off the LM." Garrett. "LM's behind us." A pause. Then Cernan. "Cosmic ray hit to your visor. Happens all the time up here." End of exchange. They never discussed it again on the official record. But Garrett Ashford retired from NASA in 1974, 2 years earlier than his contract required and 6 years before he was eligible for full pension. He never gave a reason. He never spoke publicly about Apollo 17 except in the most general terms. He never returned to academic geology. He moved to northern Montana, bought 40 acres of land with no neighbors for 15 miles, and spent the last 30 years of his life, according to the few people who knew him, staring at the night sky. He died in 2006. At his funeral, his daughter mentioned that her father had kept a journal. She found it after his death, locked in a safe deposit box at a bank in Missoula. Most of the entries were mundane: weather observations, notes about wildlife, grocery lists. But on the final page, dated 1 week before he died, Garrett had written a single sentence. "I saw the light. Vance saw the source. And they made sure we would never tell anyone what it meant." The photograph reached the Lunar Photography Analysis Team at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena on December 16, 1972, 4 days after it was taken. The analyst assigned to frame AS 17-152-23314 was Ramona Chen, 31 years old, with a background in planetary geology and 6 years of experience examining lunar surface imagery. Her job was to catalog geological features, identify scientifically interesting formations, and flag anything that required further study. She saw the structure immediately, according to her official report, filed the same day and obtained through FOIA request in 2021. She wrote, "Geometric anomaly inconsistent with known lunar features. Right-angle corners observable. Linear edges extend approximately 2.4 kilometers. Shadow analysis suggests height of 180 meters. Recommend classification pending further analysis." The report was clear, professional. It did exactly what it was supposed to do: alert NASA that something unusual had been found. 3 days later, Ramona Chen was transferred to a different project. No explanation given. No discussion. Just a memo reassigning her to cataloging Mars Mariner 9 imagery, work that was important but required none of her specialized lunar geology expertise. She continued working at JPL for another 23 years, never again assigned to lunar analysis. She died in 2008 from pancreatic cancer. Her son, going through her personal effects in 2020, found a folder of handwritten notes tucked inside a box of old textbooks. Most were technical observations, calculations, sketches of crater formations, but one note, undated, written on JPL letterhead, said simply, "They made me lie about what I saw. I told them it was a lighting anomaly. It was not a lighting anomaly. God forgive me, it was not." Ramona Chen's note raises an obvious question. What did she lie about? And more importantly, was Vance Holloway's photograph the only evidence of geometric structures on the Moon? Or was it part of a larger pattern that someone decided the public should not see? The answer came from an unexpected source. In 2017, a retired NASA imaging technician named Paul Hendricks, suffering from late-stage lung cancer and wanting, in his words, to set the record straight before I meet my maker, released a collection of photographs he had kept for 46 years. Among them was frame as 15-88-11-9er-7, taken during the Apollo 15 mission in July of 1971, 16 months before Vance photographed Gassendi crater. The Apollo 15 photograph shows Tsiolkovsky crater, located on the far side of the Moon, the hemisphere that never faces Earth, the region where radio communication with mission control is impossible because the Moon itself blocks the signal. Tsiolkovsky is 185 kilometers in diameter, with a distinctive central peak and a dark basaltic floor that makes it visible even from Earth-based telescopes. The photograph Paul Hendricks released shows something else. In the northeastern quadrant of the crater, partially shadowed by the crater rim, there is a formation, linear, geometric, approximately 1.8 kilometers in length. And like the structure in Gassendi, it has corners, perfect 90-degree angles that no natural process can explain. The photograph was classified immediately after the Apollo 15 crew returned to Earth. According to Paul, who processed the image in the photographic laboratory at Johnson Space Center, he was told it showed camera artifacts from radiation exposure and that the image should be sealed and not included in the public release catalog. But Paul had worked with space photography for 8 years by that point. He knew what radiation artifacts looked like: random speckling, streaks, fogging, not geometric shapes, not structures. He made a copy before sealing the original. He kept it hidden for 46 years, and then, 3 months before his death, he gave it to the world. NASA's response was immediate and, to anyone paying attention, revealing. Within 6 hours of Paul's photographs appearing online, NASA released a statement saying the images were known anomalies previously investigated and determined to be shadows cast by crater rim formations under unusual lighting conditions. The statement included a link to a technical paper published in 1973 by a team of NASA geologists that supposedly explained the phenomenon. The problem? The paper makes no mention of Tsiolkovsky crater. It discusses crater shadows in general terms, but provides no analysis of the specific formation Paul's photograph shows. The paper is generic. It is the kind of document you write when you need to have something official to point to, not when you are actually investigating something. The pattern becomes harder to ignore when you look at what happened next. In 1994, 22 years after Apollo 17 and 23 years after Apollo 15, NASA launched the Clementine mission, a joint project with the Department of Defense designed to test sensors and spacecraft components while mapping the moon in unprecedented detail. Clementine carried cameras capable of resolution down to 100 meters per pixel. It photographed the entire lunar surface, including both Gassendi and Tsiolkovsky craters. The mission was a success. Over 1.6 million images were returned to Earth. 99% of them were released to the public and have been used by researchers worldwide for nearly 30 years. But not all of them. In 2015, a researcher named Michael Torres, working on his doctorate in planetary geology at the University of Arizona, submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for the complete Clementine dataset, including images that had not been publicly released. It took 4 years for NASA to respond. When they finally did, they provided access to 11,000 additional images. Most showed routine lunar terrain, duplicate coverage of previously photographed areas, test shots taken during camera calibration. But 17 images, all of Gassendi crater, were listed as corrupted during transmission. The files existed. They had file sizes, timestamps, telemetry data, but the image data itself was, according to NASA, unrecoverable. Michael Torres is a statistician as well as a geologist. He calculated the probability that data corruption during transmission would affect only images of Gassendi crater, and specifically images that would have shown the region where Vance's structure was located. The odds? 1 in 47,000. And Tsiolkovsky? 23 images of that crater, taken by Clementine at various angles and lighting conditions, also showed data corruption. Same explanation. Same unrecoverable files. For 27 years after Apollo 17, Vance Holloway did not speak publicly about what he photographed in Gassendi crater. He worked as an aerospace consultant, taught engineering courses at the University of Texas, served on NASA advisory panels, gave lectures about the Apollo program to students and space enthusiasts. He talked about orbital mechanics, about the challenges of landing on the moon, about what it felt like to watch Earth rise over the lunar horizon. But he never mentioned the structure, never hinted that he had seen anything unusual, never suggested that there were questions NASA had chosen not to answer. Then, in 2019, at age 86, Vance appeared on a podcast called Beyond the Kuiper Belt, hosted by former aerospace engineer and space history researcher David Kellerman. The interview was supposed to focus on Vance's career, his memories of the Apollo program, his thoughts on future lunar exploration. For 90 minutes, it was exactly that. Then, near the end of the episode, David asked what seemed like a routine question. Did you ever see anything during your missions that surprised you? Anything you didn't expect? Vance paused. The pause lasted 7 seconds, an eternity in podcast time. Then he said, "Yes, I photographed geometric features on the lunar surface during Apollo 17 that I cannot explain using conventional geology. The photographs were classified. I was told not to discuss them. I have honored that request for 47 years, but I am 86 years old, and I think people deserve to know that there are structures on the moon that we did not build." The interview was downloaded 17,000 times in the first 24 hours. Then it vanished. The podcast hosting platform removed it, citing terms of service violations, though they would not specify which terms were violated. David Kellerman's website went offline. His social media accounts were suspended. The episode reappeared 3 days later, but Vance's final statement had been edited out, replaced with a 10-second gap that David claimed was technical difficulties during recording. But copies had already been made. The audio was out there. And 48 hours after the original interview aired, Vance received a phone call. He mentioned the call during a later interview in 2024, though he would not say who called. "A former colleague," Vance said. "Someone I trusted. Someone who told me I should reconsider public discussion of classified observations. I pointed out that I had not said the observations were classified. I had simply said I was told not to discuss them." There was a long silence. Then the person said, "Vance, some things are classified for reasons that go beyond national security. Some things are classified because we are not ready for the conversation." I asked what conversation. The person hung up. What conversation was Vance not ready to have? The answer emerged in January of 2023, when a document appeared on several research forums dedicated to space exploration history. The document was dated January 19, 1973, exactly 38 days after Apollo 17 returned to Earth. It carried a classification marking that most people had never seen, Umbra, which sits above top secret in the hierarchy of government secrecy, reserved for information so sensitive that its mere existence is classified. The document's title was direct and unsettling. Lunar Surface Anomalies, Strategic Assessment and Recommended Course of Action. It was 17 pages long. The first 12 pages contained technical analysis of photographs from Apollo 15 and Apollo 17, including detailed measurements, spectroscopic data, and geological assessments. The conclusion, stated in the careful language of government scientific analysis, was unambiguous. Structures observed in Gassendi and Tsiolkovsky craters exhibit geometric precision, inconsistent with any known natural lunar formation process. Shadow analysis, surface reflectivity, and microcrater density indicate structures are artificial in origin and predate human lunar presence by a minimum of 50 million years, with a possible range extending to 200 million years. Origin, purpose, and current status undetermined. The next 5 pages discussed implications, strategic implications, geopolitical implications, philosophical implications. And on page 16, the document made a recommendation. Given the profound uncertainty regarding origin, purpose, and potential active monitoring capabilities of observed structures, and considering the societal, religious, and geopolitical ramifications of public disclosure, this assessment recommends indefinite postponement of crewed lunar surface operations pending comprehensive analysis and development of appropriate public communication framework. The document was signed by Clayton Morris, who served as NASA administrator from 1971 to 1977, overseeing the final 3 Apollo missions and the transition to the Space Shuttle program. Clayton Morris died in 1998, but in 2022, an audio recording surfaced, allegedly from a conversation that took place in February of 1973 between Morris and officials from the Department of Defense. The recording's authenticity has been disputed. The voices have been analyzed by forensic audio experts, some of whom say it is genuine, others who say it cannot be verified, but no one has definitively proven it is fake. And what the voices discuss is specific enough, technical enough, that it is difficult to dismiss as simple fabrication. In the recording, a voice identified as Clayton Morris says, "If the public learns there are structures on the moon that we did not build, structures that predate modern humans by 50 million years, the implications cascade in ways we cannot control. Every religion has to reconsider its cosmology. Every government has to explain why this was kept secret." Every scientist has to confront the possibility that we are not the first technological civilization in this solar system. And that raises the question, where did they go? Why are these structures still there, but the builders are not? What happened to them? There is a pause. Then another voice, deeper, with what sounds like a southern accent, responds. Then we don't have that conversation, Clayton. Not now. Maybe not ever. We have the photographs. We have the data. We can study it quietly, carefully, without causing a global panic. The moon isn't going anywhere. The structures aren't going anywhere. We can go back when we're ready, when we understand what we're dealing with. Morris's voice again. And when will that be? The other voice. When we have answers, or when we have no choice. But the document and the audio recording, even if authentic, do not tell the complete story. Because they describe the structures in technical terms, dimensions, angles, materials, they do not describe what Vance Holloway actually saw when he looked through the camera viewfinder on December 12, 1972. For that, we have to go to 2024, to an interview Vance gave to independent documentary filmmaker Sarah Chen, who spent 3 years researching the Apollo 17 mission and gaining Vance's trust. The interview was conducted at Vance's home in Austin, Texas. He was 91 years old. His memory was sharp, his hands still steady, and for the first time he described not just what the photograph showed, but what he saw in those 4.7 seconds before he triggered the shutter. The structure was not just geometric, Vance said. It had an opening, on the face oriented toward Earth, an opening approximately 40 meters wide and 60 meters tall, rectangular, precise. And inside that opening, I could see, I don't know how to describe it, depth. Not just a hole in the surface, but depth that suggested interior space. The walls inside the opening appeared smooth, almost polished. And there was a pattern on the surface of the structure, arranged in a grid. Each element of the grid was maybe 10 meters square. It looked, and I know how this sounds, but it looked like solar panels. Not like our solar panels, but something serving the same function. Collecting energy. But the analysis we did later, quietly, away from official channels, suggested that if those were energy collectors, they were operating at an efficiency 40 times greater than anything we can currently achieve. Vance paused in the interview. He looked out the window of his study, toward the sky, even though it was afternoon and the moon was not visible. Then he continued. The opening was facing Earth. Not facing the sun, which would make sense if this was about collecting solar energy. It was facing Earth, like it was watching, like it had been watching for however long it's been there. And when you calculate how long it's been there, based on the microcrater analysis, you realize something that kept me awake for months after I got back. This structure was on the moon 50 million years ago. Do you understand what that means? 50 million years ago, the most advanced life on Earth were early primates, primitive mammals, nothing that could build tools, let alone spacecraft. This structure was already ancient when the first humans walked upright. It was there during the entire evolution of our species. It watched, if it was capable of watching, as we discovered fire, invented writing, built civilizations, split the atom, and finally, left our planet and came to visit it. We think we went to the moon to explore, but what if, from the perspective of whoever or whatever built that structure, we didn't go to the moon? We came back. We returned to a place that had been watching us for 50 million years. And now that we've been there, now that we've seen it, now that we know it exists, what does it know about us? The question hangs in the air, unanswered, perhaps unanswerable. But it leads to another question, one with immediate practical implications. If NASA knows there are structures on the Moon, structures that predate human civilization, structures that may have been observing Earth for 50 million years, what is the plan for going back? The answer, at least on the surface, is the Artemis program. Announced in 2017, Artemis is NASA's initiative to return humans to the Moon, with the first crewed landing tentatively scheduled for 2026, 54 years after Apollo 17. The stated objective is to establish a sustainable presence on the lunar surface, to use the Moon as a stepping stone for future Mars missions, to search for water ice in permanently shadowed craters that could provide resources for long-term habitation. The proposed landing site is near the lunar South Pole, in a region called the Artemis Base Camp Zone, chosen because it receives near-constant sunlight for solar power and sits near craters that may contain ice deposits. It is a logical choice, a safe choice, and it is approximately 2,300 kilometers from Gassendi crater. The landing site is also on the opposite hemisphere from Tsiolkovsky. In fact, every proposed Artemis landing zone, every backup site, every area designated for early exploration is far from the locations where geometric structures have been photographed. This could be coincidence. These regions offer legitimate scientific and practical advantages. Or it could be something else. A decision to return to the Moon, but to avoid, at least initially, the areas where we found things we do not understand. And what about other nations? China's Chang'e 4 mission landed on the far side of the Moon on January 3, 2019. It was the first spacecraft ever to successfully land on the lunar far side, the hemisphere permanently facing away from Earth, the region that includes Tsiolkovsky crater. The mission deployed a rover called Yutu-2, which has been exploring the von Karman crater for over 5 years, traveling more than 1,400 meters and sending back thousands of images. The images show exactly what you would expect. Ancient lunar terrain, impact debris, rocks, dust. No structures, no anomalies, no geometric formations. China's space program, like NASA's, has components that are civilian and components that are classified. The line between what is shared publicly and what is kept secret is not always clear. Did Yutu-2 photograph anything unusual? Did China find evidence of the same structures NASA found in the 1970s? If they did, would they tell the world? Or would they, like the United States apparently did, make a calculation about what the public is ready to know and decide that silence is the safer choice? There is no evidence that China has found anything. But there is also no evidence that they have not. And the absence of evidence in this context is not particularly reassuring. Vance Holloway gave his final interview on December 12, 2024, exactly 52 years after he photographed the structure in Gassendi crater. He was 91 years old. The interview was conducted at his home, recorded by Sarah Chen, the same filmmaker who had documented his earlier testimony. Vance knew his time was limited. He had been diagnosed with congestive heart failure 6 months earlier. He wanted, he said, to say what needed to be said while he still could. I photographed something on the Moon that humanity is not ready to understand, Vance said, his voice steady but quiet. Maybe we will never be ready. Maybe there is no level of technological advancement, no amount of scientific knowledge that prepares you for the realization that you are not the first, that you are not alone, and that something has been watching you for longer than your species has existed. But the structure is there. It is real. And one day, someone will go back to Gassendi. Maybe in 10 years, maybe in 50, maybe in 100. And when they do, they will have to make a decision. Do we make contact? Do we enter that opening? Do we try to understand what it is and who built it and why it has been silent for 50 million years? Or do we leave it alone? Do we acknowledge that there are some questions we are not equipped to answer? Some doors we are not ready to open? Sarah asked him what he thought we should do. Vance looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I think we lost the ability to choose the moment I took that photograph. The moment we saw it, if it was watching, it saw us. And now we wait to see what it does with that knowledge, if it does anything at all. We live in a strange time. We have detected more than 5,000 exoplanets orbiting distant stars. We have built telescopes that can see galaxies 13 billion light-years away, looking back to a time when the universe was only 700 million years old. We have rovers on Mars, probes beyond the orbit of Pluto, plans to send missions to the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. We have, in many ways, become a spacefaring civilization. And yet, we have not sent a single human being back to the moon, our closest celestial neighbor, a world only 384,400 kilometers away, in over half a century. We have the technology. We have the resources. We have the capability. The question is not whether we can go back. The question is whether we want to, whether we are ready for what we might find when we do, whether we are prepared to confront the possibility that the moon is not an empty, dead rock, but a place where something was built, something that has endured for epochs beyond human comprehension, something that may still be there, waiting, watching, remembering. Vance Holloway photographed a question in December of 1972. NASA classified the answer. And all of us, whether we know it or not, live in the shadow of that structure. Looking up at the moon, wondering what looks back. Frame as 17-152-23314 still exists in NASA's archives. The classified version was officially declassified in 2019, part of a routine review of Cold War-era space program documents. But when researchers requested access to the full image, they discovered something troubling. Only 70% of the photograph was released. 30% of the frame, a vertical strip along the right edge of the image, remains redacted. Blacked out. Classified. NASA's explanation: continued restriction necessary for national security purposes. National security for a photograph taken 52 years ago of a crater on the moon. The question no one has been able to answer. What is in that 30% that we still cannot see? What was in the frame next to the structure that is more sensitive now than it was in 1972? Or perhaps the better question, what is in that 30% that would make it impossible to maintain the official explanation that this was all just a lighting anomaly, a natural formation, a misunderstanding? What evidence is so clear, so undeniable, that even 52 years later we are still not ready to see it?